This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Alright, let's look at question 2 now of section B of the Specimen exam for paper F3. Straight to the requirements as always. Prepare the statement of profit or loss and the statement of financial position of Malrite as at 31 October 20x7. So they want both statements. A couple of things before we do it, because you can see at a quick glance there's a trial balance there. We're going to be picking up the figures. Firstly, there are marks for each bit of this you get right. There'll be varying marks. If it's simply copying a question, it might, copying a figure, it might just be half a mark. If you need workings, there might be 1 mark, 1.5. But each figure you get right will be marked separately. And although obviously you want to get 15 out of 15, the main thing is you've got to make sure you get more than 50% throughout the exam. So if you do get stuck on one little bit of it, forget it. There are plenty of other figures you can get in. Secondly, if you're doing the paper exam, obviously be neat so they can read your figures. If you're in computer-based, you'll be filling in figures. So in a sense, perhaps slightly easier. But there will be space to type in various bits of workings. So what I said before about marks for each bit you get right are still relevant. Anyway, let's have a quick look. Malrite, a limited liability company, has an accounting year end of 31st October. They're preparing the financial statements at October X7, require your assistant. The following trial balance has been extracted from the general ledger. So you have a trial balance there, which all looks fairly normal, and of course it balances. But the following information is available. Remember, the trial balance is prepared as soon as the bookkeeping is finished. But when we come to actually prepare the statements, we've got to adjust for various things, such as what's mentioned below. It says the following information is available. The allowance for receivables is to be increased to 5% of trade receivables. And it's to be treated as an admin expense. Plant is depreciated at 20% per annum using reducing balance method, and buildings at 5% per annum on original cost. Depreciation is cost of sales. Closing inventory has been counted and is found at 75,000. And finally, an invoice at 15,000 for energy costs relating to the quarter ended November X7. Remember, we're doing the statement of October X7. This invoice was received in December. Energy costs are included in admin expenses. So there are, in fact, our standard adjustments. Trial balance as soon as the bookkeeping's finished. But while we're preparing the statements themselves, we always stand to have to adjust to deal with depreciation for the year, any accruals and prepayments, irrecoverable and doubtful debts, and the closing inventory. Now, if I was doing this myself in the exam, I would, to a certain extent, jump around because some figures are very easy and they'll get marks, get them down. To avoid confusion, though, I will do it in order. Let's first of all do a statement of profit or loss. And to save going up and down the screen and confusing, I'll do my workings actually on the face of it. In the exam, that's fine as long as you're neat. If there's a lot involved, better to show workings separately further down the sheet. The layout you should be more than happy with. We'll start off with our sales revenue. Run down the trial balance and tick figures as you use them. Then we can check later if we haven't missed any. But revenue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's 6 line down. The revenue is 1,800. We've just read through those notes. None of them affected revenue. So there's an easy little bit, 1,800. Off of that we subtract the cost of sales. Now here, I'll try and be neat, but as I've said, if I go up and down the screen, it gets confusing and make you dizzy. I'll show my workings here and talk through them as I do it. First bit of cost of sales. Surely we take our opening inventory plus our purchases minus our closing inventory. So that bit's easy enough. Opening inventory, that's on the trial balance. It's not been adjusted yet. And it's 7 items, something, but it's 160. The purchases for the year. Net purchases just below revenue, 1140. To get cost of sales, subtract the closing inventory. And that was the third note below the trial balance. It was 75. So far I've got how much? 160, 1140 minus 75. So far, 1225. However, I did notice as we were going through that the second note below the trial balance mentioned depreciation and said depreciation was a cost of sales expense. So in addition to 1225, I've got to add on the depreciation. And there's two bits. First of all, if I do it on the plant, it's 20% on reducing balance. So reducing balance is cost less depreciation. So from the trial balance, cost is 220, depreciation so far is 110. And so the carrying value is 220 minus 110. 110. This year's depreciation, 20% of that is 22. So I'll say that's cost of sale, an extra cost of sales. Also, though, and finally, buildings. They're depreciated at 5% on original cost. From the trial balance, first line, buildings at cost is 740. And therefore, this year's depreciation, 37. Now, this would have been better shown as separate workings, but I've told you why I'm doing it here, and I hope you're following me. But it means the total cost of sales, 1225, 22, 37, is 1284. Which gives us a gross profit of 61516. What other expenses? Well, what I'm looking for is admin and selling and distribution. But running down the list, there's no mention anywhere of selling and distribution. The only expenses are admin expenses. But here again, I'm going to need some workings because from the trial balance, we've got 325. But there were a couple more mentioned in the notes when we read through it quickly. The first being, the first of those 4 additional items, the allowance for receivables is to be increased to 5% of receivables. And we treat as an admin expense. Well, remember, the expense is the cost of increasing the allowance. So, what allowance do we want? It wants it to be 5% of receivables. Receivables, towards the end of the trial balance of 320. 5% of 320 is 16. But the expense is the cost of increasing it from what it currently is. And at the moment there is an allowance from last year, just below admin expenses of 10. And so the increase, the expense this year to increase it is 6. So that was one adjustment I needed. The other one is the last adjustment, an invoice of 15,000 for energy costs relating to the quarter ended November X7 was received in December X7, and energy is included in admin. Now, why is this relevant? It's because our year end is in October. We didn't receive the invoice for the 3 months to November until December. And so at the end of October, we must have been owing for September and October. Because the bill we got later was the 3 months to November, so September, October, November. November, no problem. But this year, as at the end of October, we have an extra expense for 2 months. So it's 2 months out of a 3-month bill. The bill was for 15,000. And so we have an extra expense of the 10,000 that's owing. Now be careful, although it's 10,000, remember all the figures we were given are in thousands. So it's 10. But it now means the total admin expense is 341. 341. Now again, in the exam I'd have shown that as separate workings. I hope I've made that bit clear. Another quick check. There could have been selling and distribution, but there aren't. And so that brings the profit down to 57175. The only other thing that you'd expect would be tax, but there's no mention of tax, and so there we are. That's the end of the statement of profit or loss. Now, I'm sorry repeating something I said earlier, but use a bit of sense. The final 175 isn't worth any marks at all. The marks are for the individual figures. And each figure will be marked separately, provided they can find them. So, you know, the 1800, there's no way that'd be more than half a mark. It was copied straight from the question. But cost of sales, they won't just mark the 1284. They'll look at the workings for it, and if it's computer-based, there'll be space for the workings. But each bit of workings will be getting marks. So, you know, hopefully you can get it right, but even if you made a silly mistake or misread or ignored, buildings depreciation, you'll have the wrong total, clearly. But provided your workings are clear, you'll still be getting marks for those, so you'll still get most of the marks. It's not a question of it being all right or all wrong. They do mark the workings. Anyway, that is correct. That is the profit. So finally, let's do the statement of financial position. And although I'll stop saying it, yet again, some of the figures here are desperately easy because they're straight from the trial balance. But let's get it down, and then we've got it. Remember, the top bit, we show the assets. First of all, the non-current assets. And what are they? We've got buildings. The cost hasn't changed, is 740. The accumulated depreciation. Well, it was 60 at the end of last year. This year we had more depreciation. I've just crossed it out, but it was another 37 here. So 60 plus 37, 97. And so the carrying value or the net book value will be 643, the difference. We've also got plant. The cost hasn't changed and is 220. The accumulated depreciation on the trial balance from last year was 110. This year we had an extra 22. So 110 plus 22, in total 132. Giving a net book value or a carrying value of 88. And so the total for the non-current assets, 931. Oh dear, my arithmetic, how could that be 9? 731. Now on paper-based, how you show it's up to you. I would show it like that. You could show just the 731 and separate workings. A computer, there'll be space to fill it in. It'll be clear how they want it shown. What about current assets? What have we got? We've got inventory. Remember, the trial balance figure was the figure at the start of the year, but at the end of the year, from that second extra bit of information, or third bit of information, it was 75. Everything's in thousands, remember. We've got receivables. Well, the figure on the trial balance for receivables is 325. That itself didn't change, but it's less the allowance. Remember, the allowance was 10, but if you look back, we changed it. We had an extra 6. We've changed it to 16. So the net receivables are 309. I've copied a figure wrong, haven't I? Receivables. I copied the wrong figure. I do apologise. Receivables were 320. I wrote the wrong figure down. Subtract the 16. The net receivables are 304. What else? Looking at the trial balance, we dealt with most things. I think the only other thing, yes, is cash. No mention of that changing, so the cash 20. So the total current assets, let's see if I can get this right, 99399. And therefore the total assets, $1130. So that's the top bit of the statement. The bottom bit, equity and liabilities. First of all, the equity. Well, here, one or two very easy marks. Share capital. Almost at the bottom of the trial balance, you've got there 415. None of those extra bits of information affected that, so that's easy. We've got share premium. 80. Again, that would only have been affected if there'd been a new issue not recorded, but no mention of anything like that. But finally, of course, for the equity, we have retained earnings. And here I'll certainly show my workings here. On the trial balance, the retained earnings so far were 130. But this year, it'll go up by this year's profit, which was what? 175. And it would fall by any dividends this year, but by now we've looked through the whole thing. There's no mention of any dividends at all. And so the retained earnings are 305. And again, you don't lose marks twice. So if something had gone wrong in the statement of profit or loss, and you got a different figure than 175, any marks for this figure, you'd get full marks if you'd taken 130 plus your profit for the year. You don't lose marks twice for the same mistake. However, that gives us a total equity of 0, 0, 800. What about liabilities? Let me check. I don't think there were any non-current. No, there were no loans or anything. So we've simply got current liabilities. And what have we got from the trial balance? We've got trade payables. Trade payables are 250. There was no mention of that changing. In addition, we had that energy accrual. Remember, we'd that last bit of extra information with that invoice for energy. We did the workings earlier. We owe for 2 months' energy. 2 months out of a 3-month bill, we owed 10,000. And finally, is there anything else? I'd better have a quick check down the trial balance. I think we've now got everything. I can't see anything else in the trial balance. Oh, bank balance. Good heavens, that's missing that. I've got the cash in, but bank balance. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line down, 70. Although it says bank balance, appreciate because it's on the credit side. Bank is normally a debit. If it's on the credit side, it's an overdraft, and therefore it's a current liability. So bank overdraft, what's it? 70. Total 263.30. And therefore the total for equity and liabilities 1130. And yes, it balances. Without being rude, in the middle of an exam, the chance of it balancing is tiny. Doing this at a rush, however good you are, inevitably you're going to make the odd silly mistake, if nothing else, and it won't balance. Balancing itself is no marks at all. I keep saying every figure is marked separately. And so it's probably just one silly mistake. I almost missed off the bank overdraft. If I'd missed off the bank overdraft, it wouldn't have balanced. But if everything else was right, I'd have lost half a mark. Don't, for heaven's sake, if you get one of these, if it doesn't balance, just suppose I've missed that out. It didn't balance. The danger is spending the next 20 minutes trying to find out what I've got wrong. And you mustn't. Leave it. If and when you've finished the whole of the rest of the exam, then fine, come back and start finding your mistake. But don't start wasting a lot of time at that stage. When I say when you finish everything else, in particular, the last point I'll make, the multiple choice questions. there are 35 questions. You must have handed in 35 answers. Now, the chances of being able to get 35 are small. You know, you'll either run out of time, or there'll be some that you can't do, or there'll be some where you think you can do, but none of the choices work. But when you see there's a few minutes left to go on the clock, you know, on the computer bases the timer there, when you see a few minutes left, you must go back and guess the remaining answers. Because if you're guessing just 5 of them, if you put B for all of them, the chances are that at least one of them you'll get right. And, you know, 2 marks may not be much, but if you would otherwise have failed on 49, those 2 marks would be everything. And so the reason I'm stressing it here is, I say again, if this doesn't balance, you know you're wrong, fine, go through and find your error, but only when you've tried everything else in the exam, and particularly you've made sure you've got 35 answers to the multiple choice. If you've done all that in an hour, then fine, you've another hour left. You can spend your time finding your mistake on it not balancing. Good.